The Changing World Order, Part 2. The Big Cycle of Money, Credit, Debt, and Economic Activity. In this part of the Changing World Order, Ray Dalio explains one of the most powerful forces behind the rise and fall of nations: the big cycle of money, credit, debt, and economic activity. Dalio describes the economy as a simple machine made up of countless transactions. Every transaction involves a buyer exchanging money or credit for goods, services, or financial assets. Money is what people use to settle transactions, while credit is the promise to deliver money in the future. When you borrow, you are creating credit. When you pay back, you are destroying it. This constant creation and repayment of credit drives the flow of the economy, determining the rhythm of booms and busts. Dalio explains that credit allows people to spend more than they earn, creating short-term bursts of growth. But eventually, as debt grows, spending must slow down when debts are repaid, causing contractions. These alternating periods of expansion and contraction form the foundation of economic cycles. There are two main cycles that matter most: the short-term debt cycle, which lasts around 5 to 10 years, and the long-term debt cycle, which spans 50 to 100 years. Both together define the path of every economy and are central to the changing world order. The short-term debt cycle begins when credit becomes easily available. Interest rates are low, borrowing is cheap, and optimism spreads through the economy. People borrow to buy homes, expand businesses, and invest in assets. As spending rises, companies increase production, more people are hired, and incomes grow. But as the economy heats up, prices begin to rise faster than productivity. This creates inflation, forcing central banks to raise interest rates to slow borrowing and cool down the economy. Once borrowing costs increase, debt payments become harder to make, and spending slows down. Businesses cut production, unemployment rises, and a recession begins. Eventually, inflation falls, and the central bank lowers interest rates again, reigniting borrowing and spending. This continuous up-and-down motion repeats, forming the short-term cycle, the economic heartbeat that pulses through every decade. But beneath these short-term waves lies a much deeper, slower, and far more powerful movement: the long-term debt cycle. This cycle builds gradually over many decades as debts accumulate faster than incomes. Each period of prosperity and credit expansion leads people to take on more debt, believing that good times will continue indefinitely. Borrowing fuels asset prices, and rising asset prices encourage even more borrowing. This self-reinforcing loop of optimism continues until total debt becomes too large to sustain. When debt growth outpaces income growth for too long, the burden becomes unbearable. Payments rise faster than earnings, and borrowers struggle to keep up. At that stage, the economy enters a phase that Dalio calls the debt bubble top. When the long-term debt cycle reaches this point, the central bank has fewer tools to stimulate growth. Interest rates are already low, and further borrowing no longer produces the same level of economic expansion. Governments and central banks then face a dilemma. Should they allow painful defaults and austerity, or should they print more money to ease the debt burden? Historically, most nations choose the latter, printing money to avoid immediate pain. This process, known as debt monetization, marks a key stage in the long-term cycle and a critical moment in the changing world order. Dalio explains that when a central bank prints money to buy government debt or financial assets, it injects liquidity into the economy. This often prevents short-term collapse, but it also reduces the real value of money. Asset prices such as stocks, real estate, and gold rise because more money is chasing the same amount of assets. Those who own assets become wealthier, while those who rely on wages see little improvement. This widening gap between the rich and the poor leads to growing inequality and social tension. The same dynamic has repeated across empires, from the Dutch and British to the American order today. In the changing world order, Dalio highlights that debt monetization solves one problem but creates another. As more money enters circulation, inflation rises, and the value of currency declines. Over time, this erodes confidence in money itself. When people begin to doubt the stability of their currency, they rush to exchange it for real assets or foreign money, creating even greater instability. This process weakens the empire's financial strength and undermines its political unity. The wealth gap becomes a defining feature of the late stages of the long-term debt cycle. As inflation rises and inequality grows, political polarization deepens. The rich are blamed for having too much, and the poor demand more support. Governments face increasing pressure to redistribute wealth through higher taxes or social spending. At the same time, capital begins to flee the country as investors seek safety elsewhere. The outflow of wealth further damages the economy, reducing the government's ability to finance itself. Dalio observes that when such internal divisions reach extreme levels, they weaken the country's internal order, one of the main warning signs that a world power is entering decline. As confidence in the currency and government continues to erode, the final stage of the long-term debt cycle unfolds, the collapse or devaluation of money. This is the point at which the empire can no longer maintain its financial commitments in real terms. The government either officially devalues its currency or allows inflation to destroy its value over time. In either case, those holding money or bonds lose wealth, while those holding hard assets retain value. This process effectively wipes the debt slate clean, resetting the system and allowing a new cycle to begin. Dalio illustrates this recurring pattern through history. The Dutch guilder, once the world's leading reserve currency, eventually lost its dominance as debt burdens grew and money was overprinted. The British pound followed the same path during the early 20th century, when the United Kingdom faced immense war debts and declining productivity. Later, the American dollar replaced the pound as the world's leading currency after World War II. But as the United States accumulated debt and began large-scale money printing in recent decades, it too entered the late stage of its long-term debt cycle. Now, new challengers, such as China's renminbi and emerging digital currencies, signal that another major shift may be underway, the latest chapter in the changing world order. Dalio concludes this section of his book by emphasizing that all of these processes, credit creation, debt accumulation, money printing, inflation, and devaluation, are part of the same machine. They are not random or unique to any one country. Instead, they follow a logical and predictable sequence driven by human nature: optimism, greed, fear, and the pursuit of comfort. Every generation tends to believe that this time is different, yet history shows that the same patterns always repeat. Understanding where we are in the cycle, Dalio says, is the key to navigating what comes next. When a nation is early in its long-term debt cycle, borrowing and innovation create prosperity. When it is in the late stage, debt and inflation dominate, and social and political divisions grow. Recognizing these stages helps people and policymakers make wiser decisions. Dalio's message is not one of despair but of awareness, that once we understand how the machine works, we can prepare for the transitions ahead. He writes, "The most important thing is to understand how the machine works, because once you see it clearly, you can navigate it calmly, without surprises." And with that, Dalio concludes the second major part of the changing world order, setting the stage for the next. How internal and external conflicts shape the fate of nations, and how the final stages of the cycle give rise to a new world order.